Hello, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Collar here, still on location, if they call it that, somewhere else other than TCO Performance Center. Joining me from inside of the Performance Center is Will Raggett, Sports Illustrated, for our weekly hardcore breakdown. And I want to get into what Ed Donatel had to say about the defense. There's two things I want to mention first, though, Will. First, I don't want anybody to forget this is a revenge game. I feel like this is going under the radar, that this is a Yannick Ngakoue revenge game, and I just feel like people are forgetting. So I wanted to bring that up first as I was looking through what the Indianapolis Colts have done this year. And I was like, oh yeah, not only Yannick Ngakoue, but also Afadi Adenabo too. So the revenge is real. There's been a revenge game like every single game this year.
Yeah, every single week. And sometimes they're like big notable ones, like TJ Hawkinson or Patrick Peterson or Zadarius Smith. And then sometimes we're like, oh, Tyler Conklin revenge game or Yannick Ngakoue, who played 6 games for the Vikings and still led the entire 2020 Vikings in sacks. Afadio Denebo is a good one. I hadn't thought of that either. So a fellow Northwestern man. It'll be an interesting one on Saturday for sure.
Okay, so when you think about Yannick Ngakoue led the team after playing in 6 games in 2020, and yet they allowed fewer yards in terms of ranking than where the Minnesota Vikings rank right now, despite having a healthy Danielle Hunter all season long and Zadarius Smith. But I have to say, there is a part of me that's like a little befuddled just by this entire season, Will, because this week has felt like, not okay, they lost or whatever, but it felt like they lost by 1,000, and it felt like they lost to be eliminated for the playoffs. Like just how it felt. I mean, we know that you can look at the standings and see where they actually are, and we can remind ourselves, yeah, this team is going to cruise into the playoffs, and they've had one of the best seasons in the NFL by their record. But it's so hard not to look around and go, you rank 32nd in defense. Like, how are we supposed to get over this? So I think that the whole season has sort of been that way. We're like, yeah, I see a lot of things that seem problematic, and yet the overall record is so good. Like, how do I balance these things?
Yeah, no, it's strange, and I think a couple people have said that this week. Like, I was listening to a Patrick Peterson interview he did, I think with KFan, and then he's talking about like, yeah, we've lost 3 games. You'd think we'd lost 7. Like, we have to remind ourselves we're still potentially going to clinch the NFC North this week. Like, there's still going to be a top 3 seed in the playoffs. Ed Donatel will get into many things that he said there was a very interesting press conference this morning, but he said, like, hey, we've done some good things. What we want to do is contribute to winning games, and we did that 10 times. We have a lot of interceptions. We have some sacks. We've had some guys make clutch plays. It kind of felt like I think there was a Mike Zimmer press conference last year where he came to the podium with a prepared list of stats, and he was like, hey, it's not all bad, guys. There was some of those vibes, but yeah, you're right. This is a team that has 10 wins, still has everything in front of them, but it's just so hard to have any sort of belief or faith that they have the ceiling that they want to have as far as even getting past the divisional round and making a run to the NFC Championship game, potentially going to the Super Bowl, because you get blown out by the Eagles, you get blown out by the Cowboys, you lose somewhat convincingly to the Lions, and it's like I just don't know. I don't see it. And then they're 32nd in defense, which is in yards allowed per game, which is the stat that's circulating for good reason. But yeah, it's also, I mean, the negative point differential. They're the only team ever to be 10-3 and have a negative point differential. And it's just, they feel like this is like a 7-6 team that had got some breaks to go their way. And if those hadn't happened, we'd be having a much different conversation. So it's a weird place to be right now, but very winnable t-shirt and hat game coming up on Saturday at US Bank Stadium.
Right. Yeah. Their third potential in a row t-shirt and hat game. Yeah, that's where it's been, I think, challenging all season long, because there's so many games that we've come out of, even against the New York Jets, where we went like, wow, you averaged like 4 yards a pass and you had to go 5 for 6 in the red zone to even win this game. And if if these games happen periodically throughout the season and then you won convincingly in a bunch of other games, you'd just be a normal team. So like, or a normal good team. Like the Dallas Cowboys last week, they have to be looking around being like, oh, Houston, huh? You really let Houston hang in the game. Well, they've got NFL players too, and maybe something wasn't working or whatever, but you also have a 40-3 win against a really good team on your resume. So it's very, very easy to go, oh, okay, well, that was just a weird game or something. And with the Vikings, it's like every loss has been by 2 scores or complete blowout. And every win has been really close, except for on week 1. And a lot of times, like just in sports, it sort of works this way. Like basketball is this way too, where you kind of look at the teams who routinely blow teams out rather than, hey, did you win the free throw battle at the end? Like every sport uses this point differential, run differential, whatever, to grade how strong a team is. But the other thing, when I wrote about this last week, that I'm trying to keep in mind is that these rankings are not final. They're not the end of the season. And when you play a team like the Indianapolis Colts, and this is why I think it's actually kind of a good test case, this team is horrific, absolutely horrific, grotesque. I threw up in my mouth looking at their PFF grades. Although, by the way, hysterical that Yannick Ngakoue has 8.5 sacks and a 49 PFF grade out of 100. Like the most Yannick Ngakoue. That one thing you have to give him is that he's always him, no matter what. But like you can win by 20 in this game, and then you have a plus 19 point differential, and you can blow out the Giants like Philadelphia did. Like, I think that there is an opportunity here to show some teams that are way worse than you. And I think that the Giants are way worse. The current version of the Giants is a pretty bad team. Chicago is horrible. Like, the Green Bay is not good. Like, you have a chance here to do this. So that's where I don't want to like make a declaration, but it's like, if you end the season -1, if you end the season 32nd, and these are the teams you're playing, then I would be willing to say like your odds of going anywhere in the playoffs are pretty rough. So I'd love you to tell me the answers that Ed Donatel gave to you guys about what they're going to do on the defensive side.
Yeah, I mean, before we get into that, I really agree that like normally if you're talking about a 10-3 team and you look at the schedule ahead of them, you'd be like, all right, this isn't that interesting. Like we're gonna show up and watch the games and write some stories because that's what we do, and like they'll probably win 3 of the last 4 and go into the playoffs, and that's where it'll get interesting. Like, no, not with this team right now. I'm fascinated to see what the next 4 games hold because there's so much that they need to do to have anyone really believe in them. And you're exactly right. If they have an opportunity to come out and they know what just happened in this Lions game, they know they can say all they want. We're not concerned about what people are saying. They know what the national narrative, I think, is about them, that they're fraudulent, the 10-win team, and they're not in that class with the Eagles and Cowboys and 49ers and those kind of teams. And they have an opportunity to come out and play a bad Colts team and win a game by more than 8 points for the first time since week 1. Is a prime opportunity to do that. And the Giants, like you said, the rest of the way, like I think we're going to learn a lot about this team over the next 4 games. And with Donatel, it was interesting. It felt like a lot of kind of Mike Zimmer press conferences over the last couple of years where there was just kind of a tension, kind of a defensiveness. And Ed Donatel, and to his credit, he answered all the questions. And he said, I mean, he fully admitted there's no getting around it, that it has not been good enough. They have given up a ton of pass yards. What they've been trying to do isn't working, and they need to fix that. And he said that that's what they're working on. They're trying to get there, and they have a vision. They know what they're supposed to be doing. They know what it's supposed to look like. It just hasn't looked like that so far. And that's he says, I mean, we're going to get there. And he said, I don't know if it'll be in 5 days or 6 days or 7 days, but eventually we're going to get there. And to that, you kind of go, well, it better be pretty soon because the playoffs are coming up in like a month or less than a month. And you need to not be where you are right now. So as far as actual like changes that they can make, I think one that came up a bunch was just being tighter in coverage. And I think that's something we've heard about dating back to earlier this season, but there's just too much like playing off coverage and giving up all this cushion. And I mean, you look at like the Josh Reynolds touchdown against the Lions, their third one, where it's just Cam Bynum is like halfway deep in the end zone, and it feels reminiscent of the last time the Vikings played in Detroit, and Cam Dantzler was halfway deep in the end zone at the end of that game. And so I think they need to play tighter coverage, which was interesting because then the follow up was, so when they're playing off, is that what they're being coached to do, or what's going on there? And it was kind of a non-answer to that. But they need to play tighter coverage. They need to figure out this pass rush. And Donatel kind of admitted that Zadarius Smith has been playing through some injury, and he says he's healthy now. And I think he had 6 pressures against the Lions, which is more along the norm for him, but hasn't had a sack in the last 4 games. So they got to get the pass rush going because that helps the coverage. They got to play better coverage because that'll help the pass rush get home. It's this thing right now where neither of them are working, and they got to find answers quick.
Yeah, that's how you finish 32nd in yards against, is that you don't pressure the
Yeah.
quarterback and you don't cover anyone. I mean, I think that some of the answer is maybe you just have to play some press coverage. I mean, at some point, but they're clearly concerned that Patrick Peterson is going to get roasted. And he has been a couple of times this year, even playing off coverage. Like, his speed is not Patrick Peterson from 2011. So they are aware of that. And I think that it's really worked for Patrick Peterson because it relies so much on his intelligence. But on the other side, you have inexperienced guys or new guys that you're bringing in, or Cam Dantzler, who's just always had this trouble. And it's like it works for one, but doesn't work for the other guys. And yeah, I mean, you know, the Harrison Smith element, I know he didn't play against the Lions, but that hasn't been a great fit all year, except for the big plays he's made in a handful of games, but he hasn't had the same impact. And I think that's probably usage. So, you know, Donatel seems to be sort of talking out of both sides of his mouth a little bit of like, no, my scheme still works, but like, yeah, you guys are right. The results are bad, but it still works. But I guess we have to make some changes, but still works. And I feel like you guys need to remember it still works. And the quote that I saw, because I'll be back tomorrow for my usual, but, you know, still away for the moment. But the quote that really stuck out to me was when he said, like, well, we've been close a lot to sacking quarterbacks. I mean, they're 22nd in pressures. They're 17th in, you know, the total sacks. Like, not really, not so much. You know, the whole idea of just like sending 4. And the problem that you can run into, though, is now, you know, you try to change a bunch of things and what's working, what's not working, which was my question to O'Connell the other day. Like, how do you even evaluate in small samples of just a couple games what's worked and what hasn't worked? And I think the answer that we're always just going to have to come back to here, Will, is like, yeah, you can make some changes. It could probably be a little better, but you're just going to have to win with offense. Like, I think that's really the story here. Yes, you're going to have some guys that'll make some plays on defense. The run defense has actually been pretty great most of the second half of the season, except for the Dallas game. So you're going to have to stuff the run, but you're going to give up points and you have to outscore the other team. And an astute Purple Insider follower said the other day, like, hey man, you know, they only had 16 points by the fourth quarter at the end of the game. Like that, I mean, it's a fair point. As great as they played on offense, you know, they didn't finish some things off. And if they want to win, I think that's what it comes down to. So in a way, all eyes against the Colts and the Giants and the Packers are going to be on the defense. But in a way, I want to see the offense crack into the top 7 or 8 in the NFL in scoring because they're just outside of that. And if they play like they did against Detroit, they can do that. But if Indianapolis holds them down and Indy doesn't have a horrendous defense, if they hold them down, I think we're still going to say, like, that's where you have to really win.
Yeah, no, it is. And that's what made the Lions game interesting to me is if a couple plays go differently, they could have won that in the shootout because Kirk Cousins was that good. Justin Jefferson was that good. It comes down to when your defense is playing as poorly as it is, you have zero margin for error. And like when you turn the ball over trying to do a Dalvin Cook pop pass at the 3-yard line, that completely screws you. And when TJ Hawkinson drops a pass on a third down or you get stuffed on a shotgun run on fourth down, like just little plays like that change the entire game because you don't have any margin for error when you know we turned it over. We're not getting this ball back for 5 minutes unless they score on a deep pass immediately, which they did a couple times. So that's the tough thing. It puts a lot of strain on the Vikings offense. And another thing we can get into is, I mean, we also heard from Wes Phillips this morning, and he was talking about the running game, which just hasn't been working recently. I mean, they carried it 17 times for 22 yards against the Lions. And so that forced them to become one-dimensional. If they can get that going, that'll really help. But on the defense, like you bring up a good point. The run defense has been good. Getting Dalvin Tomlinson back was big for that. Guys like Kyrus Tonga and James Lynch and people like that have been playing well in the run, and I think their linebackers can still fit the run well, and that'll be a good thing to have against Jonathan Taylor because they've been getting killed through the air. But the Colts, their one strength on offense is running the ball, and Matt Ryan has really had a rough season. He's looking pretty washed, so that it kind of sets up as a perfect get right spot for this defense. But a couple more things on Donatel. I mean, you mentioned a good quote where he said, "We like our 4-man rush, and they've been close so many times. We get a lot of hurries from this group, but it's just that extra little thing. If you can hold the coverage a little bit longer, a lot of those rushes will work with 4." So there's always some kind of thing you can point to, like if our coverage was holding a little longer, then the pass rush would get home. But then, like I said earlier, it's like if the pass rush can get home quicker, that helps the coverage out, and it's just this cycle that is kind of killing them right now. Another interesting thing he said, I mean, he was just asked straight up towards the end after already kind of talking about this for a while, that is it scheme or execution? And he said, which is an interesting quote. He said, I think it's really more execution. You know what I mean? Just get tighter and so forth. We have a good mixture of schemes. And boy, I don't know, like if I was a player and I got a hold of that quote, I'm thinking like, what? I mean, you're putting this on us when the scheme is calling for us to play 9 yards off and leave the middle of the field wide open. And I think there's some truth to it from both sides. Like if you're Donatel, you're looking at it like, hey, this scheme has been successful before. I mean, the last 10 years, Vic Fangio defenses, Brandon State, like there's a reason this scheme is popular around the NFL. It's not being executed right now very well, and maybe they just don't have the pieces for it at the moment, especially at cornerback. But if I'm a player, I'm thinking, like, why don't we have a scheme that's tailored to the personnel that we have that can help us win some games? So it's a fascinating thing. There's a lot of pressure, I think, on this team because of the Colts matchup being what it is to come out. And if they give up 350 yards passing to Matt Ryan and 450 yards to the Colts, I don't know if you can let Donatel call defensive plays the next week. If you even let his key card work the next week. Like I don't know, man. So that's why this Saturday I think is going to be really interesting.
I completely agree. I mean, when you look at this Indianapolis Colts offense, where it really starts is their offensive line, which has been good in previous years, is a horror show at this point. So even as bad as Matt Ryan has looked, and it's been really, really bad, I think that in Atlanta, it showed as well that, you know, when he had any sort of pressure, when their offensive line wasn't good, I mean, he just struggled a lot because there's nothing left there in terms of his athleticism or the arm strength. Like in order to make a good pass, he has to have the whole wind up. You know, he's got to look like Greg Maddux, like just doing the whole wind up to even get 85 miles an hour out of that fastball. And
he got benched for Sam Ellinger of all people earlier this year, and then they were like, "Oh wait, Sam Ellinger actually sucks. Let's go back to Matt Ryan."
how bad is Nick Foles right now, though? By the way, like, is he just collecting checks because he was under contract and he has to? I mean, Nick Foles has the Super Bowl ring; he can do whatever he wants. But I don't know. It's sort of funny that he never got a chance as bad as they've looked. But they have, you know, they've got a couple of receivers that can get open. I mean, Michael Pittman is a pretty good player, and as you mentioned, Jonathan Taylor. But this team is horrendous. Like there is just no excuse whatsoever. Like even with the Jets, you could go like, well, Garrett Wilson, man. I mean, that guy is super legit. Like that's a superstar receiver in the making right there. First round draft pick. Okay. Like if you're a bad defense, that guy's going to roast you. And it's kind of been like an elite receiver each week and a quarterback who's been able to make some plays. But you know, there's nothing that gives me total confidence though, because they gave up so many yards to Mac Jones, and like that Patriots offense just makes me sad inside to watch. I mean, the other night it was just screen pass after screen pass. It's like, that's what Indy's going to do to this team as well. But I 100% agree that if they get over 350 yards, that's just like, is Mike Pettin available to call plays? And I 100% agree with you that when you say it's all execution, if you're a player in the locker room, and we've seen this happen many times with Mike Zimmer, when fingers start getting pointed, and this is how we know we're not wrong to be acting the way we are about this, because we've got fingers being pointed, folks. A finger has been pointed. Although we have multiple, because with Kevin O'Connell, he's like, we have to look at all the scheme things. And then with Ed Donatelli, he's like, no, it's the players. Yes. Yeah, yes. This is what you get when you have a team feeling the pressure. Like they know they have to win here. Like you can't start a season 10-2 and then just sputter and fall apart and lose in the first round. Like that just looks really bad for you. That'll look like, yeah, it was all a scam. It was all just luck or anything. They know that. Like they know that's exactly how it's going to look. And I think it'll be super fascinating to see how it plays out and how they make these adjustments. But these quotes, O'Connell's quotes, they're making it very clear that the pressure is being felt at TCO Performance Center.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely different for Donatel and for O'Connell, because I think if this continues on the path that it's down and they get bounced quick, like I don't think there's any question necessarily that Donatel won't be back. O'Connell obviously is not on anything remotely close to a hot seat. It's his first year. It's gone about as brilliantly as you could hope in terms of results and in terms of the culture stuff that you see from the post game speeches in the locker room and the buy-in. And even if they, like, let's say they lose 3 of the next 4 and they're 11-6 or whatever, and they lose in the first or second round, I think O'Connell, I think it'll still be mostly viewed as a successful year for O'Connell because they won the NFC North and they got to the playoffs and they were better than they were the last 2 years. But there will start to be some questioning of, all right, are we 100% sure that this guy is like a future Hall of Fame coach that we anointed him after 11 games, and so he's feeling the pressure to keep this momentum going and do whatever it takes to get to a point where they're not going to get sent home in the first round. So yeah, and I think with Indianapolis, like we're setting it up, and it's true that it is a good matchup for this defense, all things considered, but they're also not like the Chicago Bears in terms of weapons. Like Michael Pittman's a good receiver. Paris Campbell, Alec Pierce are fine secondary guys. They've got a few tight ends that are athletic. Like the Vikings are still gonna have to show up, and they'll have Harrison Smith back, we think, and whoever will be playing corner opposite Patrick Peterson, like they're gonna have to make plays and do some things differently. So it's gonna be a test in that sense. I mean, Matt Ryan is not, I think, even on the level of like Mac Jones or Mike White or Jared Goff, but they still have some NFL caliber skill position guys. I want to just read a couple more Donatel quotes because I find them very fascinating, and I've been scrolling through this transcribed doc here. And one of the ones he said, where was it? He said he was asked how significantly things can be changed. He says, I don't think it's ever drastic. I really don't think it's drastic. You set your plan in April or May of what kind of team you want to be, but you also got to know through injuries or maybe changes in the league, you have to make adjustments along the way. And then he said, there's been a ton of teams that pick up momentum later in the season, and we have a lot of momentum. And it's like, do you? I don't think you do. I mean, you have 10 wins, but it's not going well at all defensively. The other kind of one of the hot topics has been Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter, who are your 2 premier pass rushers, like dropping into coverage. And there were some weird moments of that in that Lions game that just make you pause and think. And he said, I think the numbers, when you look at a 3-4 defense, there are times where they'll drop as if they were just a 4-3 end. They maybe drop in some replacement zones. The numbers would maybe come out kind of similar. We're pleased with that number. We don't overdrop those guys. And sure, but I think the argument could be made that if they've dropped like 50 times or whatever, that's 50 too many, and they should never be doing that because they are your only really consistently reliable threats to get to the passer. So it was a very interesting press conference in which also a certain reporter brought up that they are 32nd in yards allowed per game, which I think Dontel was probably aware of, and he was asked how he feels about that. He said, I don't feel good about that. You want to contribute to your team winning, and pointed out that the Vikings are used to having a lot of shutdown defenses, which I wanted to say, well, not the last couple years, but you're right that before that, and then you go back historically, it's true, and they're just not there right now. And so it was so interesting to kind of hear the tone from this guy who's been an NFL coach for a really long time, and hear him kind of defending his scheme, and just to sense that he is feeling the heat right now, and he knows that things have to get better. So Yeah, if they they give up 400 plus yards to the Colts, I was joking that maybe they'll send Mike Pettin down to do the press conference next week, and they're not going to subject Ed to that again. But if they do, it's just going to be probably the same thing.
It's so interesting how he had to handle that press conference because, in a way, if you say, "Oh yeah, I've been doing everything wrong," they're like, okay, well, is there someone else around who could do it better? Right? But if you also say, like you mentioned, like, oh, it's all execution, then the locker room goes, what? And it,
All right, here's one more really quick. He was asked about changing the scheme, and he goes, "We're still learning some of our players and their strengths, and working through injuries. It's about to be week 15. What do you?" That one made me like, did you really just say that? We're still learning our players. That's what you say when it's training camp, or maybe like week 2. Uh,
well,
so sorry. Go ahead.
he poured gasoline on this thing. I mean, right? Like there's no way around it. Not only that, but okay, like I will give you that Harrison Smith is a big part of this thing. But if you are in December and you're missing one player off of your defense, and literally every other player that you started with in OTAs is here, come on, man. You can't say, oh, we're working around injuries. You missed Delvin Tomlinson for a couple weeks. Like, that's not working around injuries. There's a one guy. Like, he may be referring to, Zadarius Smith being a little banged up, but even then, Zadarius has not missed a game and he's been in there. And also, like, you've been drafting rotational pass rushers for how long? And the learning players, also the momentum. It's like, are we living in reality here, Edwin? Like, what is going on? I mean, they've given up 400 plus yards in 5 straight games. It's never happened in franchise history before. Once you get on the wrong side of those factoids, it's not good. It's not good. So to me, it sounds like what's being reflected at the press conference connects with Kevin O'Connell saying we have to be honest with ourselves multiple times, saying we have to be honest with ourselves. I thought that's a really telling comment. It's like, who's not being honest with themselves? Oh, I think I found him. I think I found the guy who's not being honest with himself. So this tension, you've got to think between Donatel and O'Connell, because O'Connell's probably looking at the offense and they rank 10th. And 10th is pretty good in points. It's not what, the people imagined in fantasy land when they hired O'Connell, that they would, run over the league, but they consistently put up somewhere between 25 and 35 points every single week. I mean, it's like an inconsistently consistent offense that still at the end of the game always ends up with the same amount of points, even though it's a roller coaster through our lives. And if you're 10th in points and you're looking at the defense going, come on, guys, I mean, that's good enough, right? Like, that should be good enough. But instead, you're just bleeding yardage. You're not on the field as much. And one small interesting fact, and I have to double check this. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did the Colts have their bye week last week?
They did, yeah.
It's like
they're coming off the bye.
Yeah. I just, like something to keep an eye on there, that they're the freshest they're going to be all year, whereas the Vikings play on short rest coming off of a road game where they kind of got whipped a little bit. So I don't know, like this one on the schedule all year, I've been like, I don't care. I don't even want to go. Like, just like all these interesting games, all these like super fascinating matchups. And then there's just this stink bomb existing here, like on a Saturday in December where, everyone would be rather shopping than watching the Colts play. And all of a sudden, intrigue has arisen, which is great. Will, since is there anything with the Colts that you want to say about their team? I mean, I just think that they're not good, but they have just slightly enough defensive linemen to be a little dangerous.
That's the one thing that you look at, and they are 31st in DVOA as a team. Not they're close with Houston in the race to be last in DVOA. And there's like, it's those two, and then there's a tier gap between the Cardinals at number 30. And the breakdown of that is they are 32nd in offense. They're the worst offense in the NFL by DVOA, worse than the Davis Mills, Jeff Driscoll, Houston Texans. But they're 12th in defense, and that's a legitimate number. And they're also terrible in special teams, which is, I don't know how much of that is random or if that's actually like, oh, they're bad at special teams. But they're 12th in defense, and you look at their defensive front, and you're like, okay, DeForest Buckner is a really good player. Grover Stewart, I think, is an underrated guy who people don't know as much as Buckner, but he's been really, really good this year. Yannick Ngakoue, he can speed rush around the edge, and then not much else, but he's done that to 8.5 sacks and a bunch of sacks throughout his career. And then Kwity Paye is a guy who we talked about. I think it was if that was 2020 or 2021 as a first round possibility for the Vikings when they needed more pass rush, and so he's a first round caliber guy who's pretty good. So you look at the front four, and that's maybe the one thing that concerns you. I mean, they still have they have Stephon Gilmore, who's a former Defensive Player of the Year. He's not quite there anymore. Good linebackers, even with Shaquille Leonard being on injured reserve. So the defense is it's competent. It's good, in fact. And I think specifically looking at the defensive line, that's going to be a tough front to get your running game going against. And that's the one thing I think that the Vikings, that's a question right now, and that's going to be a focus for them this week, is trying to get the running game going. Wes Phillips said they're gonna shrink some things down. They're gonna kind of minimize and simplify things in the running game to try to just hone in on the fundamentals and just get the kind of core concepts right, because there's just been too many 0-yard gains and losses and plays that get blown up right away. And I think getting Garrett Bradbury back will for sure help. Getting Christian Darrisaw back will for sure help. He's been one of the best players on this team, one of the best linemen in the league. So that'll be big, but it's going to be a tough front to run against. And he also said, Wes Phillips said that he was showing the linemen and the whole kind of running game, like clips of them doing it well and hitting on runs and just as a reminder, like, hey, we can do this. This is what it looks like. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, run game will be something to watch. And then they might be able to put some pressure on Cousins as well. And we'll see if he can follow up that absolute gem that he had in Detroit.
Okay, before we wrap up, I've got a couple of interesting fans-only questions. If you're down to answer them, I think they're really really astute questions, and I thought they were good. I wanted to work them in before the end of the week. From Mitzi via email, what do you think the reason is for the Vikings' third quarter issues in the games that always come down to the last minute? Is it the team playing down to their opponent's level, or perhaps playing not to lose? I think that the third quarter thing is pretty fascinating. I don't know that I have a great explanation for it, for why it seems that happens on a weekly basis. And, they did offensively move the ball in the third quarter against the Colts or against the Lions, but they came out and went 3 and out. And that was actually a really big moment in the game because they had just fumbled at the end of the half. And the whole thing was, well, okay, you blew the drive, but you're getting the ball back. You should be able to go get those points back. You give away the ball, and then all of a sudden Detroit gets rolling and their defense forgot how to play in the third quarter. Is this, I don't know. Like, it seems like a reach to say inexperienced coaching staff. Halftime adjustments are probably overrated. Like, I don't know. I really don't know why this is.
It's been bugging me that I can't like just put some like we like to talk about football, and when there's a problem we like to like have an explanation for it, say this is why this is happening and this is how you can fix it. And I think with the defense we can kind of see some of that, and it's pretty apparent. But the third quarter thing, yeah, it's I can't really wrap my finger around why that has kind of continually gone so poorly. And they did, yeah, you're right. They did score a touchdown. They had the Thielen touchdown late in the third quarter, but yeah, they came out and they had a short pass to KJ, a run up the middle to Dalvin Cook, and then a 1-yard pass to Thielen on 3rd and 2, and then they're punting right away. And that's a big play in the game because then the Lions go down and score to make it a 2-score game. And I don't know. I don't know if it's a play calling thing. It's like an aggressiveness thing, and they're not being aggressive enough, or if they're not adjusting at halftime, or I think there's probably at least some level of randomness to it, and they're not actually like this horrible in the third quarter, and that'll maybe even out some more. But yeah, it's been weird. I wish I had a better answer.
The funny thing is that when you look at their like EPA per play on offense and defense, the first 3 quarters, they're a bottom third team. And then the fourth quarter on both offense and defense, they've been like the best team in the league. And I guess I wonder about like the style of play in the fourth quarter when there's like desperation to throw it to Justin Jefferson and to force the ball down the field because you're in a close game or you're coming back. I would have said that a lot of times they've started the third quarter with the lead, and maybe they don't know how to put teams away. I think there's pretty good evidence to say they don't know how to put teams away. The fact that they've won all the games the way that they have. And against the Jets, I would definitely say that was the case. But I think the answer is probably like a week to week type of thing of what happened when they were up so much against the Jets. What was it, 14 points coming out of halftime? And you sort of have a chance to put them away and you don't do it, and then you let them hang around. Maybe there is a little bit too like playing too conservatively and not pushing the ball down the field and playing aggressively, that when this team is aggressive, they can make a lot of big plays. And we've seen that. And I think that's one of the reasons that the defensive conversation is so frustrating, because you're like, I think it's there. I don't think it's there to be the number one defense. I don't even think it's there to be the number 15 defense, but I do think it's there to be better than this. And, and I would say even for a lot of times, the offense is the same thing. Like, I think it's there that you could be a little more aggressive than you are, but I also feel like Kevin O'Connell has been very nervous about how bad the defense is. And this is how, like, we always split them into how's the offense, how's the defense, as if they have nothing to do with each other, but they are connected in the way that each has to play. And so maybe there's something within that, or maybe it is completely random and it's just a strange thing that's happened to them. And then, 2 weeks from now, they'll have a 30-point third quarter out of absolutely nowhere. So it's kind of football. It's a great question. I wish either one of us had like a more distinct answer. Okay, another one here for you. With 4 games left, what are the odds of Justin Jefferson breaking the single season receiving record? He's now within like 500 yards of that.
I think there's a good chance. I mean, and more than ever when you see him coming off of a 223-yard game that could have been 255 if they had ruled that he hadn't stepped out, which I still don't think he did. And it's not like a perfect enough angle where you can say with 100% certainty that he didn't, but it looks to me like his heel was in the air. So yeah, he was a little frustrated with that. But there's so many times this season and in previous seasons where I was like, he's going to break the Sammy White 210-yard single game record, and because he would have like 85 yards in the first quarter and like 150 at halftime, and then he wouldn't. And it finally happened, and that it kind of calls back to what you were just talking about, the aggressiveness of the offense. Is like you see Justin Jefferson do these things, and you're like, he should have 150 yards every week. That's how good he is, because the teams can double him and he can still get open with his route running, and Kirk can still put it in these small windows, and Jefferson's going to catch it 95% of the time. So, 4 games left. What is the Calvin Johnson record? It's like somewhere in the 19s. And Jefferson, I mean, I think the real question is that they're similar, but can he get to 2,000 and be the first 2,000-yard receiver ever? So the record at Calvin Johnson 2012 is 1,964. And so he's 464 away. He has to average like 115 a game to get there, which is that's what he does. I mean, I think he's averaging that this season at least, with buoyed by last week in Detroit. So I think he gets there. The only question would be like, if the Packers and or Bears games at the end are meaningless, how much do you want to take any chances with playing your best, most valuable player? So I think that would be the only thing that would slow him down. Or like, there's always a chance that defenses are like, we're not letting this happen, and we're going to like put 3 guys on him. And then to some extent, even if you're Justin Jefferson, Calvin Johnson, Randy Moss, there's nothing you can do about that to some extent. So I think to answer the question, I think there's a very good chance that he breaks the all-time record.
I'm going to say that week 18 probably won't matter. And now, to quote Mike Zimmer, I care about wins and not records.
And we've talked about, I think Kevin O'Connell is not that way, and he will understand like this would be cool to get Jefferson this, and he would be happy, but
you can't play him.
You can't. The most important thing is to have him cooking in the wild card round. So
you can't play. If you play Jefferson in week 18 to get him a record and he turns an ankle, oh my God. It's just like one of the worst Vikings things to ever happen, right? And then they lose by 30 in the first round, and we all go, Kevin O'Connell deserves to be fired for playing Justin Jefferson, right? Like Yeah, I don't think. I think if they're sitting all the starters, they need to sit all the starters, and records be darned. But I think that scenario looks actually very likely. I mean that
Would you play him in week 18 if it's like the 49ers are on our heels for the 2 seed, or does the 2 versus the 3 not even really matter that much?
I don't think it
I don't.
does. I don't think it does. I think it's sort of like inevitable that we're going to be watching Nick Mullins play in the final game of the season. Because like if you're talking about just right now, if the playoffs started today, I mean, you're talking about the difference between like the Giants and the football team, the Commanders, I guess. Like does that matter to you? Like it doesn't really matter to me. So, um,
Maybe
you
he'll
know,
just get it over the next 3 weeks because
it's not impossible.
he just had 200. He's had 200. He's had 220. He's had 190. He's had 180. It's not impossible for him to get 470 over the next 3. It's probably unlikely, but
So we're both picking the Vikings for this. Is there even a discussion?
no. And you picked the Lions last week, right?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, and I should have. I knew I should have, and I was like, "This is the Lions are playing well. It's a bad matchup on the road. All this, they're going to be desperate." And then I didn't because I figured the Vikings voodoo magic would work. And if Cook doesn't fumble that pass at the 3 yard line, like it could have happened. But yeah, 100% picking the Vikings. If they lose to the Colts, we'll be having a fun the sky is falling disaster panic mode podcast next week.
And I think that would be fully justified if that is the case. Will, thanks for your time as always. And we will get together and do this again leading up to the Giants. We're like going to have to do these on Wednesdays now because of the
Yeah,
schedule.
we got 2 Saturday games in a row.
Yeah, it's a little bit throwing my life off completely. In fact, I mean the way that I had scheduled my little family trip was based on thinking it was going to be on a Sunday, and I was like, oh well, I'll basically only miss like a little bit out there, just one day out there, and then they totally screwed me up, and I missed this legendary Donatel press conference. It hurts me inside, but I'm glad that you were there to break it down for us. So
The good news for you is Matt Daniels did not say anything interesting today, which was rare. He seemed a little not his usual bubbly self, perhaps having to do with a 42-yard fake punt that they gave up in that Detroit game. So you didn't miss anything there. You did miss a lot with Ed Donatel. But
fair
yeah,
enough. That's maybe the first
thanks.
press conference all year that Matt Daniels didn't bring something.
Exactly. Yeah. No, but this is good. We'll do it again next week.
All right, sounds good, and thank you all for listening.